Xbox rules! I don't care what people say, Xbox is the game to play!
I've been falling out of love with gaming. I used to play video games all the time to the point that I started writing reviews on this channel as a creative outlet. I wanted to learn how to write, but I couldn't imagine myself outside of gaming. So, I started writing about games. Eventually, I went from doing basic analysis to writing about my relationship with games. Nowadays, games are primarily a social backdrop for me. I hop on Fortnite with my buds and we catch up on life. Occasionally there's a new single player game that I'm interested in, but for the most part, I have resigned myself to the fact that gaming is not my main hobby anymore. All of this stands as an inversion of my childhood, where I rarely got to play games with my friends. Growing up, I had two distinguishers from my friends when it came to gaming. I couldn't play M-rated games, and I had an Xbox. Most of my friends were hopping on Call of Duty, and I wasn't allowed to join them. The most I could do was watch my siblings play COD Zombies. Occasionally I'd sneak in a round or two if my mom wasn't home. However, I didn't get to play COD until I got gifted Black Ops 3 by my friend for my birthday. The other main game that my friends played was Minecraft, but most of them were on PS3, so I was kinda isolated when it came to games. I could play online with randoms, and occasionally my brother and I would play games together, but in terms of playing with people my age, I was out of luck. As a result, gaming was primarily an independent experience for me. I would spend hours getting lost in primarily RPGs and platformers. In fact, we originally owned a Wii. We got an Xbox 360 because of the Kinect and all of the mature games. My brother was entering high school, so they were around that age where they wanted to play COD and Skyrim. However, my mom was pretty strict on what I could touch. This was a big problem because most of the cool looking Xbox games were M-rated, so I felt like I didn't have a lot of exciting games to play. However, I did actually sneak in one M-rated game when I was 7. While nobody was home, I was looking through our Xbox games, and I found this game with a green guy in the cover. I had no idea what it was about, where it even came from, but I loved the color green, and the subtitle sounded awesome. So I booted it up, and a lifelong obsession formed.
Sorry for the quick thaw, Master Chief. Things are a little hectic right now.
On first encounter, Halo CE felt monumental. That feels weird to say because by the time I played it, I played games that are so much more technically advanced, but even as a child I could recognize the weight behind it. I was a little weirded out by it lacking zooming and sprinting in the way that I saw in other video games, but I figured that was just how old it was, and that it came out before those things existed. In a way, that gave me more respect for it because I was like, wow, this game is so old that it must have been before all these big mechanics. It must be that important to get a new anniversary release. It even had 2 graphics modes, which blew my mind, and at the time I stuck to the OG graphics because I preferred the colder colors. It all felt distinctly adult to me, like I was playing a serious game. The first mission further added to this because it had all the stereotypes of what a child would find to be adult. Dark colors, blood, serious dialogue, military men, action, all of that stuff. It's all set in an escalating escape from a ship. It sets the vibe for that exact childhood fantasy of what adults play, a serious action-packed game. I was sat in front of my TV, ready for a thrill ride. And then...
We're coming in too fast! Damn! Air brake failure! They flew too early! I'm losing her! Right for impact!
Chief? Chief, can you hear me?
The second mission, Halo, is a complete inversion on first glance. It starts so much wider, more open. The colors are more green compared to the gray of the Pillar of Autumn. It all feels natural until you turn, and the horizon is curling up. You can't walk towards it, and so you try to walk around, and there's just nothing. It's all nature, but you're locked into this space beside this weird gray bridge. It feels lonely, isolating. Sitting there in front of the TV, I was mesmerized. I spent time trying to do things like search every wall to discover any secrets, or jumping onto the lower part of the bridge and believing that there might be secrets there. As the mission progresses, you get more into the action, but the mystery grows. One of my favorite details is how brutalist the architecture is. At the time, I obviously didn't know it was brutalist, but I was obsessed. It was so clearly unnatural and felt like it jutted out of the space. It was discomforting and it contrasted with the environment, especially combined with moments like when you go underground and it's all gray and filled with tech. It creates this very surreal environment. It felt like this dream, like what I was exploring was on the verge of being real, but it had artificial qualities. The colors were cold and the environment was empty. I had to traverse all of this empty space, only finding enemies to fight or signs of previously killed Marines. It was all weird, discomforting, and I adored it. I was obsessed with this mission as a child. When I think of Halo CE, my memory of it is nearly entirely absorbed by it. It was almost its own game to me. I would wait until my parents weren't home and then sneak in a playthrough of this mission. Eventually I even started risking playing it while my mom was home and pretended that the game was rated T. When that failed, I convinced her to let me keep playing it. I would constantly try to find new exploits, taking note of how enemies behaved, give myself challenges like only using certain weapons or other restraints. I needed to explore this Halo ring. I was convinced that I hadn't found everything yet. It's the type of wonder that arguably only a child could have. Without the restraints of not being able to afford new games, would I even have bothered replaying this mission so much? I wasn't even bothered with finishing the game for a while, and in fact, I think it took years before I ever finished Halo CE. I was more preoccupied with how I could stretch this level thin. The rest of Halo CE is amazing, but none of it left its impact on me quite like the second level. In fact, while I adore the entire franchise, none of the games left quite the impact on me that Halo CE did. That level of curiosity instilled in me is unmatched, and I've rarely felt it in other games, even open world games. The next time I felt that level of curiosity for a game's world was Breath of the Wild. There's something to be said about being able to just sit and observe a game's world. Forget about progressing the main quest or unlocking things, just sitting in it, observing enemies in the distance, trying to find the unmarked secrets, that sort of thing. That's when gaming becomes magic for me. Another amazing detail was the NPC Marines. As a child, it was so exciting to have them. I was so used to being the lone warrior in games, and those Marines made it feel like I was fighting in a team. I would make up stories in my head for why they were there and try to coordinate tactical moves. In a way, it made gaming feel less lonely. Ultimately, Halo CE was an independent, solitary, borderline ritualistic experience for me. I'd come home from school, excited to play the second mission all over again. I had nobody in my life to share it with, but that didn't matter. In fact, because I had nobody to play it with, I never touched one of the most important components of the game. The multiplayer. I formed this deep relationship with one side of the game, but until my teenage years, the other side remained foreign. Multiplayer is core to Halo's identity for the broader public, but it didn't impact my first 7 years with the franchise. I don't particularly remember ever trying online with randoms. I think the most I ever got into the online was a few matches of Halo 3 and Reach, alongside putting like 20 hours into 5's multiplayer. Really though, none of this defined Halo in my brain. The multiplayer wasn't why I was buying the games, because I was more concerned with the campaign. However, my mid-teenage years really started to flip my experience with video games. In late 2019, I started making a bunch of online friends, and for the first time ever, my friend group was into the same games as me. I finally had people to talk about my games with. You can really tell this amplified my interest in games because my upload schedule hit an unreal cadence in 2020. One of the most exciting parts of this was I got to show my friends games that I originally never got to show anyone else. One of my friends was starting to get into shooters, and this was perfect because I finally had someone to play them with. We didn't play the campaign together, but at the very least we discussed it. However, on a cold winter night, we got a bunch of our friends together to hop on Halo CE's multiplayer out of nowhere. I don't even remember why we did this, but we did, and it was incredible. We were laughing and having a blast exploiting all the systems in the multiplayer. We'd sneak around the maps trying to find exploits, talk about which weapons were the most overpowered, and make alliances against each other in free-for-all matches. All this felt like the dream of what I heard playing Halo was like in the 2000s. My experience with multiplayer always came from hearing other people tell me why it was supposedly good and worth caring about, so I actually experienced that felt meaningful. I remember hopping off and being excited to do it all over again. One of the weirdest aspects of this to think about is that this wasn't ever necessarily the game's intention. Halo CE originally didn't even have online, and I'm sure that when they were designing it, they certainly didn't expect people from a bunch of different regions and ages hopping on call to play it. Yeah, it felt like the type of experience that everyone talks about, playing Halo with your friends while you laugh and eat pizza on a Friday night. This experience didn't carry on past winter break, but maybe it didn't need to. It all gave me this deep appreciation for the game that I'd spent 7 years enjoying. My love for Halo CE had faded into the backdrop of my life for the most part, but this experience really revived it for me and got me engaged with Halo again. It all led into 2021 where I was beyond excited for Infinite. When Infinite dropped, my friend and I spent over 100 hours grinding it out over winter break. In fact, because the multiplayer dropped weeks before the single player, for the first time ever I was forced to interact with the multiplayer over the campaign. I remember spending my entire Thanksgiving break on Infinite's multiplayer whenever I could. I had my team at work going remote for the week, because it gave me more time with Halo. For the first time ever, I felt all those warm feelings that I had read when people described playing CE at launch. I was constantly trying to get better at it, learning each map, figuring out the best weapons, and pulling my friends into various schemes. No longer was I reading and trying to recreate other people's archives, but instead forming my own memories. In one of my friend groups, they had this thing called honorable duels, where we would jump on the center of a map and have all of us spectate a pistol duel. Even with the limited options, we were still making it our game. Halo Infinite felt like my Halo CE, even if it wasn't quite as groundbreaking. Every day I'd go to school at 7 AM, get home at 6 PM, play Halo, and talk about my day until 12 AM, and then cram in homework. It was the cycle that always left me tired, and it was probably a bad idea, but at the same time, those late nights with Halo reshaped how I viewed the games. The multiplayer now really mattered to me, and in fact became equally as important as the campaign. While writing this video, something dawned on me. Halo Infinite was the last video game launch that I was ever really into. There have been video games that I've been into since then, but Halo Infinite was the last video game that I was actively counting down the days for the launch, fantasizing about playing, and constantly talking about. It's the moment that my relationship with gaming really changed, and it hasn't gone back since then. I'm actually a massive fan of Infinite's campaign, but I haven't replayed it in a few years, so maybe I wouldn't think that now. However, at the time, it gave me many of those same initial chills as CE. It had not just the action-packed opening, but also a big Halo ring for me to explore. While it was a lot more direct with how it wanted you to explore it, containing things like a map, quest markers, and unlockables, I would often try to avoid this and would instead just roam around it like I did with Halo as a 7-year-old. At the same time, I'm not 7 years old sitting by myself in front of my TV anymore. I had friends to share this with, and so I did. That became Halo's new identity to me. Even as I've moved on 1 from Infinite and Halo multiplayer in general, I find myself always looking back fondly on those two different eras. At one point, Halo was what I did by myself when I got home from school. It was my way of unplugging from the world and exploring the surreal sci-fi landscape. Then it became my social outlet to chill out with my friends. I don't consider myself much of a gamer anymore. I don't talk about it immediately when people ask about my hobbies, because I think that my main interests are movies, reading, and music. I just don't have the space for gaming in my life that I used to have. In fact, I barely even know the upcoming games for next year, whereas there was a point in time where I could tell you about games that hadn't even been announced yet. In my brain, gaming became too convoluted, too time-consuming, I just didn't have space for that anymore. Yet, a few months back, I was sitting on a train to go to a concert, my nerves shut up from the news. Halo CE was getting remade. I couldn't believe it. Well, okay, I actually could believe it. I did bullshit you guys a little bit in the last paragraph. I'm mostly not tapped into gaming news anymore, but I actually do have a lot of friends that are, and if there's one thing that I'm still tapped into, it's Halo rumors. So, for months, the back of my mind was filled with anxiety over a potentially horrible Halo CE remake. Plus, every time it got brought up, nearly everyone I knew groaned about how this was a stupid, pointless remake meant to milk profit. I watched the trailer and couldn't believe my eyes. The Halo CE remake was real, and it looked good. I had a bunch of gripes with the gameplay and art style changes, but as a whole, it made CE feel new again. It looked like what I imagined it to be as a child. When you're a child, those low-poly environments feel so much more detailed, and this remake felt like someone taking the version of Halo CE in my head and pouring it out onto the screen. I felt so many conflicted emotions, but overall I was ecstatic. It got me wondering if this is how people felt in 2011 when they first saw CE anniversary. With all these thoughts swirling around my brain, I knew that I needed to go back to Halo Combat Evolved. Honestly, when I first tried to boot up Halo CE on the Master Chief Collection, I was deeply annoyed. The Microsoft login was being a pain, and I got hit with a bunch of pop-ups which made me sigh. It felt like I had to fight the Microsoft account system for 20 minutes, and that made me want to give up. I was experiencing so many negative thoughts and made me question why I was bothering with this after a long day when I could just go boot up something on HBO Max. Was Halo CE worth fighting to play? Those small annoyances made me think that maybe the revisit was going to be a failed endeavor at resparking some magic. In an attempt to revive my interest in gaming, I proved exactly why I don't care as much about it anymore. However, once I got into the game, it all came flooding back. For the first mission, I was mainly just having a blast. I was watching all these action set pieces in excitement, remembering how as a kid the ship used to feel massive to me. At one point, the Pillar of Autumn felt endless, and I could clearly see all the barriers and how the game subtly railroads you. I was appreciating how it staggered in enemy encounters and introduced mechanics. It felt like an experience of, this is cute, but not anything mind-blowing. I was still having a blast, but nothing felt noteworthy compared to the average gaming experience that I've had this year. However, getting to the second mission moved me. Staring out at the Halo ring made me feel curious all over again. I looked out at the long stretch of land, and it all felt endless to me. As an adult who has played Halo many times, I know it isn't endless, but it feels that way. I felt myself getting wrapped up in those childhood feelings all over again. I was playing around with the physics, trying out all the weapons, and using different approaches to every encounter. I even got wrapped up in the dumb gamer shit like trying to 360 no-scope enemies. Another fun type of experiment I did was trying to recreate various things I did as a kid. For example, I would jump underneath the bridge every time, thinking that maybe I could find something, and so I did that knowing I wouldn't find anything new. I kept trying to push the bounds of where my vehicle could fit, or throwing Master Chief into unreachable spaces such as the middle of the Forerunner structures. When the Covenant dropped into enemies, I would try to jump into the ship and get frustrated when it was just out of reach, or excited when I made my way onto it. I found myself getting excited when I remembered small details such as how to damage ships, finding a sniper rifle for the first time, and feeling like I was fighting an army of never-ending enemies. All of this was reinvigorating, because it felt like I got to see this familiar game with a set of brand new eyes. Yet, at the same time, it felt like putting those childhood glasses back on. I think now that I'm an adult, I finally get to experience nostalgia. I experienced this weird phenomenon while writing this video. Originally, I wasn't sure what form it would take. I thought that maybe I'd just write about the second level, but all of a sudden I remembered that I had those experiences with CE's multiplayer. Then I was going to write about the entire game, but all of a sudden I just wanted to keep diving back into the second mission. I wanted to get my friends on so that we could play CE's multiplayer and try doing honorable duels in it instead of Infinite. In fact, I did pull my friends into doing that. I got so excited to pull my friends back into Halo CE all over again. At that point, I realized that the rest of the campaign almost didn't matter to me. Who gives a shit if I don't finish the game? If you really want a holistic review of Halo CE, there's hundreds to choose from. At one point in my life, my dream was to do an in-depth review of each Halo game, but now that feels like a slog. In fact, that Infinite footage you're seeing in this video comes from when I actually tried writing a whole review and getting footage of the entire campaign back when it first came out. I think I'm falling back in love with gaming again. I had to distance myself from games to realize why I care about them in the first place. I spent my childhood being wrapped up in gaming. I spent years both playing and making games, and eventually that shifted to writing about them. There was no escape from it because everything became related to games. I got caught up in what was new with games, and looking back was often focused on the obvious things or historical trends. Since 2022, I've really stepped back from gaming. Every year my playtime in games has gone down, and it's honestly an in-joke at this point that I barely play games anymore. With that distance, my heart grew fonder of Halo. It reminded me of why it even mattered in the first place. There's something to be said about how a game can open up your brain. I spent the last decade absorbed in the feelings it gave me without even knowing it. My passion for gameplay systems and the way it got jump-started by Halo, and the way it presented its landscape made me feel deeply curious. I've then translated these passions into things outside of gaming. When you're younger, games leave a much deeper imprint on you because you haven't experienced as much of the world yet. That second mission felt expansive, like the world had opened up. It wasn't like anything that I'd experienced up to that point. It wasn't the complete freedom of the sandbox games of my time, and it wasn't like the very linear games that I had played beforehand. It existed as this weird in-between that felt new to me. There's something to be said about the way that children try to break games. When you're 7, you have time to replay the same mission over and over again. As a result, you start messing around with all the little systems, figuring out how they work, and making all sorts of hypotheses to test. It's something that has been sorely missing in how I approach games over the past few years because I have been overly worried about finishing them. I think that's the most important takeaway that I could have from replaying Halo CE. It doesn't matter if I finish games. You don't need to get far in a game for it to carry a lifelong impact on you. Sometimes it's about those random moments that are scattered across the game rather than the whole piece. If I play only 2 missions of a game but it forms a lifelong curiosity, then that means more than finishing a game and forgetting that I ever played it. At my core, I am a gamer, even if I don't particularly claim that label nowadays. I think over the years I complicated the process of enjoying games. Games have been present in every era of my life, and their role will always shift, but that's the whole intention. Games are meant to be fun and fit into our lives, even if it's in ways that the designers didn't originally intend for. Did the designers in 2001 think that a 7-year-old would spend all of their time replaying the second mission years later on a different console? Probably not. That doesn't matter. Over the last 2 years, my upload schedule has crawled to a halt, but I haven't ever stopped writing. If anything, I'm writing more now than I was a few years ago. I just focus on different things. It's been years since I've even opened up a Google Doc to write about a single video game. Maybe it'll take a few more years for the next gaming video, or maybe it'll never happen again. Either way, I don't think it actually matters to me anymore. What really matters is that I'm having fun doing it, because if not, what's the point? Usually these videos end off on a deep note, but honestly I just want people to go revisit their favorite childhood games. Go boot up your favorite game, try recreating those childhood memories in it, get some friends together or play or talk about it. Do something fun, because that's the point.